In the heart of the Indian Ocean lies Madagascar, an island of unparalleled beauty, ancient customs, and untamed power. But in the 19th century, its red soil ran with blood. She was called many names: queen, tyrant, monster. Her subjects feared her, her enemies dreaded her, and history remembers her as the Blood Queen. Ranavalona I did not just rule. She crushed, she purged, she burned. Converts were hunted, dissidents were executed, and thousands vanished in pits of flame and poison. Yet behind this terror was a woman determined to preserve her kingdom from foreign influence at any cost. Was she a demon draped in silk, or a savior cloaked in cruelty? Step into the darkened palace halls and the smoky highland skies, and witness the reign of the woman who made hell feel local. The kingdom of Imarina was at a crossroads. Perched high in Madagascar's central plateau, its people had spent generations at war, unifying scattered tribes under a single throne. That throne now belonged to Ranavalona I, a young king eager to modernize his kingdom in the image of European powers. Where his predecessors had looked inward, Ranavalona turned outward, embracing missionaries, diplomats, and trade with France and Britain. His court became a curious mix of tradition and foreign sophistication. Churches were built, Bibles distributed. Young Malagasy nobles were taught to read and write not in the script of their ancestors, but in the Roman alphabet. But within the palace grounds, a quieter force was watching, waiting, and calculating. Ranavalona, one of Radama's senior wives, moved through court life like a shadow at dusk. She was intelligent, connected, and fiercely loyal to the customs of her ancestors. Unlike Radama, she had no interest in foreign tongues or foreign gods. She saw the missionaries as interlopers and the European influence as poison. Whispers circulated that she privately mocked the king's obsession with foreign advisors. But she bided her time. She understood power and patience. When Ranavalona I died unexpectedly in 1828, the court erupted into a silent storm. Succession was never guaranteed in Imarina, and the death of a king without a clear heir invited bloodshed. Rivals gathered supporters. Nobles scrambled for position. But Ranavalona, shrewd and resolute, struck first. She rallied key military leaders, bribed palace guards, and eliminated opposition with stunning precision. Within days, she declared herself sovereign, not as queen consort or regent, but as monarch in her own right. Her enemies were executed or exiled. Those who had mocked her ambition were suddenly kneeling before her throne. She crowned herself with deliberate grandeur, invoking the spirits of her ancestors and the authority of the royal bloodline. "I am the legitimate ruler," she declared, her voice echoing through the palace. "No one will rule Imarina except me." And thus began one of the most fearsome reigns in African history. The early years of Ranavalona's rule were marked not just by consolidation, but by transformation. She was not content to merely hold power. She sought to reshape the kingdom. The first target of her fury was Christianity. Where Radama had opened the door to missionaries, Ranavalona slammed it shut with fire and steel. In 1831, she banned the teaching of Christianity. By 1835, even the possession of a Bible could be a death sentence. Churches were torn down. European clergy were expelled, and their Malagasy converts were ordered to renounce their faith or face judgment. The trials came in the form of tangina, an ancient and lethal ordeal of justice. Accused Christians were forced to swallow a poisonous nut from the tangina tree, followed by 3 pieces of chicken skin. If they vomited the skin, they were considered innocent. If they didn't, they died. Survival was rare. By some estimates, up to 3,000 people per year perished under this cruel method during her reign. Tangina was not only a test of loyalty to her rule, it was a spiritual ritual that reaffirmed ancestral customs over foreign religion. But Ranavalona's punishments weren't limited to Tangina alone. Converts were publicly executed, some by spears, others by crucifixion, and the most feared, fire. Entire families were burned alive, their ashes scattered as warnings. Men, women, and even children were tied together and set aflame before crowds ordered to cheer or at least remained silent. Witnesses who wept or protested were seized and added to the flames. The queen's decree was final. To embrace a foreign god is to betray your ancestors. While missionaries fled back to Europe with horror in their hearts, Ranavalona's court doubled down on traditional rituals. Sacrifices to the ancestors became more elaborate. Royal processions displayed the captured heads of enemies. The queen would ride through the capital in gold and scarlet robes, flanked by soldiers and executioners, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk watching mice. Every step she took was calculated, every word laced with warning. She didn't just demand obedience, she demanded belief. Foreign envoys began arriving not as honored guests, but as cautious negotiators. The British consul William Ellis attempted to reintroduce Christian missions. He was met with polite words and death threats. The French, eager to establish influence, sent ships. Ranavalona responded with a brutal show of resistance. Her soldiers, familiar with the terrain and skilled in ambush, repelled European troops with deadly efficiency. In one French campaign, over 150 men died, not in battle, but through tropical disease, starvation, and disarray. She had turned Madagascar's wilderness into her ally. Those foreigners who remained were forced to walk a narrow line. Traders found themselves stripped of goods and accused of espionage. Interpreters were dragged into courtrooms and subjected to Tangina trials. Even diplomats were not immune. One ambassador was forced to watch an entire village executed after being accused of spreading Christianity through bribes. Ranavalona sent him back to Europe with a chilling message: Madagascar bows to no one. Inside the kingdom, she built a complex system of informants and spies. No conversation was truly private. A child could report a parent. A servant could betray a master. The queen created a society in which fear became a language, a way to survive. Markets bustled, families worked, festivals were held, but always under the gaze of the sovereign, whose presence loomed in every shadow and smoke trail. Villagers whispered prayers not to a Christian god, but to the ancestors, and to the queen who had become their living embodiment of divine wrath. In one harrowing incident, a Christian woman refused to recant her faith. She was dragged through the streets, her clothes torn, her body bruised. In the town square, before a crowd of hundreds, she was bound to a stake, surrounded by what soaked in oil. Her final words were a hymn. The fire consumed her, and her scream echoed off the clay walls. The crowd was silent, not from compassion, but fear that the queen's spies were watching for tears. And so the fires burned on. Madagascar under Ranavalona I had become a realm sculpted by fear. Not just the fear of execution, or the crackling of fire consuming yet another convert, but a fear so deeply woven into the fabric of society that it shaped how people spoke, how they moved, even how they prayed, if they dared to pray at all. The capital, Antananarivo, once a seat of royal elegance and celebration, now resembled a prison with invisible bars. The queen's eyes were everywhere, not always in person, but in the whispered reports of loyalists, in the sudden disappearances of neighbors, in the silence that followed any hint of dissent. Each week, royal enforcers read out public announcements from the queen, listing new executions, naming traitors, and occasionally praising villages that had rooted out impure elements. These announcements were followed by parades of prisoners, bound, bloodied, and broken, led through the streets to their punishment. Entire communities were implicated if a single person was found with a Bible or caught murmuring foreign hymns. Punishment was rarely individual. Ranavalona believed fear was most effective when collective. A father's crime became his family's curse. A convert's secret became his village's grave. Outside the capital, her policies turned rural Madagascar into a landscape of desperation. Those convicted of minor offenses, theft, disrespect, or merely failing to report a convert, were sentenced to forced labor. Chains clanked endlessly on mountain roads as men and women toiled under guard, building fortresses, cutting timber, and digging trenches in the red clay with bare hands. Food was scarce. Disease spread unchecked. Many never returned. For the queen, Their death was neither punishment nor tragedy. It was policy. Ranavalona's military campaigns added to the human toll, determined to expand her control beyond the highlands. She sent waves of poorly equipped conscripts into the lowland jungles to crush rival tribes and rebellious outposts. These campaigns were brutal and poorly organized. Soldiers, sometimes without shoes or weapons, marched for weeks through swamps and mosquito-infested forests. Many starved, others succumbed to fever. The Queen's generals did not mourn their losses. To them, human life was an expendable resource in the machinery of domination. One such campaign against the coastal Sakalava people resulted in the deaths of over 10,000 soldiers, not from enemy resistance, but from exposure and disease. When word reached Antananarivo, Ranavalona responded not with grief, but with resolve. She doubled recruitment, sending more men into the jungles. To her, victory was not measured in lives saved, but in borders secured. Her cruelty extended even into her inner circle. Nobles who once championed her rise began to question the wisdom of her policies. A few spoke too loudly in court. They vanished. Others remained silent and vanished anyway. At times, Ranavalona would host feasts where favored nobles were served exotic dishes and praised for their loyalty. The next day, one might be accused of treachery and executed by fire or impalement. Even her own family was not immune. A cousin who expressed sympathy for missionaries was forced to swallow boiling water as punishment. He died screaming, his body displayed in the palace courtyard as a warning. And yet, she was not mad. Her tyranny was not the result of delusion, but of deliberate, calculated strategy. In her mind, she was protecting Madagascar from annihilation. All around her, Africa was falling, to missionaries, to merchants, to armies under foreign flags. Kingdoms were collapsing beneath the weight of treaties they did not understand, rulers signing away sovereignty in exchange for rifles and rum. Ranavalona would not allow Madagascar to become one of them. She chose isolation, she chose tradition, and she chose violence as the price of survival. In her later years, the Queen grew slower, but no less dangerous. Her face, once youthful and calculating, now bore the lines of a life ruled by suspicion and control. She took long walks through the palace gardens, often alone, pausing to speak with birds or whisper prayers to her ancestors. Servants who misread her moods were executed. Others who made her laugh might receive gold. There was no consistency, no pattern, only her will. By the early 1860s, a quiet shift was beginning beneath the surface. A younger generation of nobles, educated secretly and deeply weary of the bloodshed, began to maneuver cautiously. They spoke of reform in hushed tones, of reopening diplomatic channels, of reintroducing foreign trade without losing the soul of the nation. Among them was Rikoto, Ranavalona's own son, a man born into her reign of terror, yet harboring a different vision for Madagascar. Rikoto had been raised in her shadow, but had managed to form discreet connections with European figures. He corresponded with French and British envoys under pseudonyms, sending coded messages that hinted at a more open future. He knew his mother would never willingly step down nor tolerate dissent. So he waited, as she once had, not with rebellion, but with patience. In 1861, Queen Ranavalona I passed away quietly in her sleep. No poison, no coup, no grand spectacle. Just the end of a life defined by the control of others' deaths. The announcement was made with ceremonial gravity. Priests recited ancient chants. Drums beat for days. The entire capital was ordered into mourning. But beneath the surface, something else stirred. Relief. Rikoto ascended to the throne as Radama II. His first acts were dramatic reversals of his mother's policies. He welcomed foreign embassies, reopened schools, and outlawed the Tangina trials. Christian missionaries returned, and public executions were curtailed. The iron grip of fear loosened, but the scars of 3 decades of tyranny could not be erased so easily. Generations had lived and died under Ranavalona's watchful eye. Her name was still spoken in a whisper, not from reverence, but from reflex. Historians would debate her legacy for generations. To some, she was a monstrous despot, a butcher who extinguished tens, perhaps hundreds, of thousands of lives in the name of tradition. To others, she was a sovereign who stood firm against colonial domination, who refused to let Madagascar become another European trophy. She left behind a kingdom bruised but unbroken, a people traumatized but still Malagasy. Her story, written in ash and blood, carved into the hills and burned into the memory of a nation, remains one of the darkest and most fascinating reigns in African history. A woman who ruled without compromise, a queen who chose fire over surrender, a name that history, no matter how reluctant, could never forget.
I'm